Windows Vista was a unique version of Windows. Windows Vista, codenamed Longhorn, had the longest development of any version of Windows. Its predecessor, Windows XP, was released in 2001, and Windows Vista was released to manufacturers in 2006. Why was this? Well, in today's video, I will be discussing what happened between 2001 and 2006 and Windows Vista's legacy all the way to the end of life in 2017. I will also be using footage of 4 Longhorn builds: 4008, 4053, 5048, and 5112 to help explore the 5-year development process of Windows Vista. Our story begins in 2001 with the release of Windows XP. I've talked about this a couple times on this channel, but back in 2000 and 2001, Microsoft was forming a plan about the future releases of Windows. They were working on Windows Whistler at the time, which would later become what we know it today as Windows XP. Microsoft decided that the next version of Windows would be a minor release of Windows, and that they would then, in a few years, in around 2005 or 2006, release a big version of Windows. The major release would be codenamed Blackcomb, and the minor release in between the two would be codenamed Longhorn. This naming scheme matches the names of 2 mountains in the ski resort in Canada. Between Whistler Mountain and Blackcomb Mountain, there is a bar and grill called Longhorn. This shows what Microsoft had in mind for the future of Windows. In between 2 big versions of Windows would be a smaller interim release called Longhorn. I think this is somewhat important to the story because it gives insight on what Microsoft wanted these 3 releases to be, and it never came to be. But this reasoning right here is a lot of the reason why the development of Longhorn was so long, but I'll get to that in a bit. So now with the release of Windows XP, it was time to work on the new version of Windows. Now there was no builds of Longhorn before Milestone 3 in 2003, so we can't really say what was going on in the earliest stages of development, but I can get downloads of Windows Longhorn starting with Milestone 3 on WinWorld, so I'll start with that. One of the new things that Windows Longhorn had was a new interface. This is technically Milestone 4 build 4008, but there aren't too many differences between the two that I'll be looking at. Longhorn build 4008 was compiled on the 19th of February 2003. There is a new theme in Milestone 4 called Plex, and it looks very blue. The whole desktop looks very blue with that Longhorn wallpaper. Windows Longhorn also brought the sidebar, a new part of the interface that allows you to put widgets on, such as a clock and a slideshow from your pictures folder. 4008 also introduced a parental controls function that allowed the parents to limit the amount of time a certain user could use the computer. Now I'm going to skip ahead a bit to Milestone 7 build 4053. You'll see in this build there was a new theme. The theme looks more traditional, kind of like a new color scheme of the old Luna theme back in Windows XP. The new theme is called the Slate theme. Something I want to bring up is that all the builds of Longhorn up until close to the release is that they all use Windows XP sounds. You may have heard it on the internet, including it in one of my own videos, that there was new sounds that Windows Longhorn used. But this is not true. They sound really good, and I wish they did show up in at least one build of Longhorn, but they didn't. Now under the hood, Windows Longhorn was doing many new things. One of these things was a new file system called WinFS, which is short for Windows Future Storage. There was also a change to the installer. Instead of booting to an old DOS mode to set things up, then rebooting to graphical installer like they did in every version of Windows from version 3.0 to Windows XP, Longhorn Milestone 4 builds and upused a new installer, Windows PE. One of the changes that came in Windows PE was the install.win file, which is like an ISO of the entire operating system. Microsoft was promising a lot from Windows Longhorn, so much so that they strayed away from their first vision of what the future of Windows was. And with all of the features Microsoft was developing, more bugs started popping up and builds were starting to get less stable. Microsoft kept pushing back the release date of Longhorn, and eventually in 2005, Microsoft decided to start from scratch. In 2005, Microsoft reset all development on Windows Longhorn and went back to Windows Server 2003. Now, from the build standpoint, there's actually several builds that showed the reset. None of them were available to download from WinWorld, so I'll try to remember to put a card in now and leave a link down in the description to a video by Flytech Videos on a build of Longhorn and the development reset, also known as the Omega 13 builds of Windows Longhorn. You'll see these Omega 13 builds are almost indistinguishable from Windows XP. The third build I'm showing is build 5048, which was compiled on the 1st of April 2005. Longhorn build 5048 is a pre-beta build of Windows Longhorn. The theme used is a very early version of the arrow theme, which is a theme in Windows Vista. Through using a command, you can also get an early look of the arrow glass, the visual look that made the windows on your screen actually look like a window pane. This build also comes with a search function included right in the start menu. You can also see some of the final icons. This is also the build that had the red screen of death if Windows has an error when it boots. I made a video showing that off if you want to see it. The fourth build is build 5112, which was compiled on the 20th of July 2005, and is a beta 1 build. At this point, the file name of Windows Longhorn had been finalized as Windows Vista, which Microsoft touted would bring clarity to your world. You will see the final name a few times in this build, including in the watermark in the bottom right. However, you can still see references to Vista's codename, such as in the boot screen. The search function in the start menu works better in this build. It now looks like the start menu was built to accommodate the search bar, whereas in build 5048 it just looks like a search bar was slapped there as if it was an afterthought. The icons in this build look closer to the final icons in Windows Vista, and the taskbar also looks closer to the final taskbar in Vista as well. Not too much change here to the final release to manufacturing or RTM. We just have general tweaks to the appearance of the operating system, finalizing sounds, and making each build more stable. In late 2006, Vista was released to manufacturers, and in early 2007 it was available for retail. And what did people think about it? Well, you probably already know this, but people hated Vista. But why did people hate Vista? Well, everyone has their own opinion why, but they generally come down to these points. Hardware wasn't ready for it. It was pretty much a complete rewrite for people writing drivers. The user account control, or UAC, was annoying. It wasn't ready when it was released, and the end product didn't really show 5 years of development. Let's start with the first one. The hardware wasn't ready for the new version of Windows. Windows Vista was released to the public in 2007, and at this point, we have only had 64-bit technology for a few years. Multiple core processors weren't really commonplace yet, and there were still computers being sold with only 512 megabytes of RAM. Another way to see it is that its predecessor, Windows XP, had a minimum requirements of 233 MHz processor, although 300 MHz processor or more is recommended, 64 megabytes of RAM, but it was recommended to have 120 megabytes or more, and a video resolution of 800 by 600 according to ZDNet. Compare this to Windows Vista's minimum requirements. 800 MHz processor, although 100 GHz or 1000 MHz is recommended, 512 megabytes of RAM, but 1 GB or 1000 megabytes is recommended, and a graphics processor that is DirectX 9 capable, according to TechJourney.net. That's a big jump, especially when you look at the recommended requirements. The problem is that it was allowed to ask for back in the day. And one of the big new features of Windows Vista, the arrow glass effect, wouldn't work on minimum requirements, which left a lot of users disappointed. The last point kind of goes along with this point. Windows Vista, at least the manufacturers that had the right drivers for it, was way different from Windows XP. The old drivers from Windows XP didn't really work well with Windows Vista, and thus manufacturers had to write new drivers for a bunch of old hardware if they wanted to keep supporting the old hardware. If the manufacturers decided simply to not rewrite their drivers, the users of old hardware could not upgrade to Windows Vista and have their older hardware work like they did in Windows XP. Another common complaint about Windows Vista is that they redid the way security worked in Windows XP. In Windows XP, there was a common administrator account that had pretty much complete control over the computer. The one thing about that is that people would always log in under the administrator account, and thus if something malicious got executed, the malware would be able to do anything with the computer without the user knowing. Windows Vista gave this an overhaul. A user account set up as an administrator would actually only be a standard user account by default with limited access to the computer. However, if they were an application that tried to do things that only an administrator could do, it would show a prompt called the User Account Control, or UAC prompt. It would tell the user that someone tried to do an administrative task, some information about where the executable came from, and the publisher of the executable. The user could then grant temporary administrative privileges to the program or deny administrative privileges. From a security point of view, this was good. It meant that anything that wanted to do something to the system wouldn't need permission from the user to do so. But for the end user, this became an annoyance. Developers were used to be able to do administrative duties on demand, so when Vista came around made everything stop until the user granted permission to the application, it became very annoying, and people to this day hate Vista for doing that. This is a problem that got solved over time. Developers learned not to constantly try to do things with the system, and Microsoft lowered the sensitivity of the UAC. And UAC is actually still in Windows. You probably don't notice it as much. For the majority of the time, UAC prompts only come up when you try to install an application. If you don't dig into the system modify things, you've probably never seen them. The next thing people hate Vista for is that Vista wasn't ready to be released when it was. Vista RTM was a buggy mess. Now, it wasn't Windows Me bad, but it was still not good. It could have used more time before it was released for bug testing. My last reason why people don't like Windows Vista may not be a reason that people might say, but I think it's still true. The end product of Windows Vista didn't look like 5 years of development went into it. Now, I've already kind of responded to this. The development of Windows Vista that we know today was actually only 2 years, from the beginning of 2005 to the end of 2006. This kind of explains the last point. Windows Vista RTM, despite having 5 years of development, was rushed to get Vista out as soon as possible, and thus the buggy mess I mentioned before. Now, Vista RTM did have some ideas in it that Microsoft had for Longhorn before the development reset in 2005. The sidebar was in Windows Vista, but not in the form that was in the pre-reset builds of Longhorn. Instead of having a select few widgets that you can add to the sidebar, Vista had window gadgets, which is similar to the widgets you have in your phone's home screen. These gadgets could be docked to the sidebar, but you could also drag them onto the desktop. But the majority of the features in the pre-reset builds of Longhorn, like WinFS for example, were ultimately dumped, never to be seen again in any version of Windows. With all this hate of Windows Vista, some OEMs like HP or Dell decided not to ship their computers with Windows Vista pre-installed, and instead decided to use its predecessor, Windows XP. Some of these computers were marketed as Windows Vista capable. These computers would come with Windows XP, but also have a disk of Windows Vista if the user wanted to upgrade. The problem with this is it kind of misled the user. The version of Windows Vista that could be installed was Home Basic, which was a cut down version of Windows Vista and didn't have some of the features that Vista had, like Arrow Glass, for example. Users were let down because of this. They were expecting a full Vista experience, but they got less than they thought they would. Microsoft heard people's issues with Vista, and over the next few years they released 2 service packs for Windows Vista. These improved the experience and made Vista actually usable. As of Windows Vista Service Pack 1, the operating system was more stable than was in RTM. Windows Vista Service Pack 1 also added support for the exFAT file system. In my opinion, Service Pack 1 was where Vista should have been at RTM. Service Pack 1 was a lot more usable, and in 2009 Service Pack 2 was released, which added 7 more improvements to the stability of Windows Vista. I'd say that Windows Vista Service Pack 2 was a great operating system. The reason why no one likes Windows Vista is because after 5 years between it and its predecessor, there's a good amount of hype around Vista at its release. People tried Vista, hated it, and never touched it again. In essence, the reputation of Vista had been destroyed. No one wanted to use Vista Service Pack 2 because all they remembered of the Vista name was Vista RTM. This was further proven by Windows Mojave experiment. Microsoft gave a lot of people who hated Vista and gave them Windows Mojave, which they said would be a new version of Windows. Now, Windows Mojave was only Windows Vista Service Pack 1 with all the references to Windows Vista taken out, but they didn't tell people that. And people loved it. Watch this.
So it's just an informal discussion. I'll be asking some questions and you just answer them as honestly as you can.
So why haven't you upgraded to Vista yet?
Just the bad things I've heard about it.
I just heard negative things. I never tried it myself. I wouldn't touch the thing.
It's horrible. We have so many problems.
It crashes.
I've heard nothing but bad things about Vista, really.
I'd like you to rate your overall favorability of Windows Vista.
Okay.
Sheet of paper. Okay, so you gave Windows Vista a 0.
Today, I'm going to show you a little bit about Windows Mojave, which is actually the newest version of Windows.
I want to see it. I want to see how it works.
Wow.
I like that security feature.
That's great.
So,
That's great.
I love gadgets.
Man, it's awesome.
Oh, what do you think of this new operating system?
really cool. It's very impressive.
The speed is incredible, right?
I need an upgrade, and that looks like everything that I would need.
I would put this as a 10.
All right.
Well, I have to confess to you, this is Vista.
Really?
You blew my mind.
Are you serious?
This is Windows Vista.
Son of a gun. Yeah, you got me.
I had no idea that you could do all this with Windows Vista.
Windows 7 was available to consumers on the 22nd of October 2009. Users loved it, and even with it receiving end of life earlier this year, there are still some people using Windows 7. But here's the thing, Windows 7 under the hood was Vista's twin. That was the headline of an article by PC World. That's not to say that Microsoft didn't tweak things between the two. The user account control prompts were less sensitive, and developers had years to adapt. The hardware caught up, so now the Arrow theme works like it did in Windows Vista. To many users, Windows 7 was what Windows Vista should have been. If you look at the market shares, in January 2009, Windows Vista had 19.9% of market share, according to StatCounter. It crossed paths in July 2010, and after Windows 7 beat Windows XP in October of 2011, Windows 7 kept majority until January 2019, when Windows 10 took the lead. Once Windows 7 came to the scene, the already falling shares of XP started to go down a bit more, and Windows Vista started to decline. People loved 7, and Vista was kind of forgotten. The legacy of Windows Vista is kind of sad. If we look at what Microsoft initially wanted Windows Vista and 7 to be compared to how they turned out, the roles of Longhorn and Blackcomb kind of reversed. Longhorn ended up being a big change between it and XP. It was Windows 7 that was the minor release. Its job mostly to clean up the mess that Vista made. Last Tech Tips did a video where they looked back on Windows Vista, and I agree with what you said. Windows Vista in the beginning, yeah, it was pretty bad, but when the service packs came out, Windows Vista was actually pretty good. And that's the story of Windows Vista. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys thought about it, and maybe I'll do another one like this. Also let me know what you guys think of Windows Vista. Was it good? Was it bad? Do you guys agree with me? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video, and if you like my other videos, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.